So welcome everyone. My name is Nancy Hafer and I've got my video camera on, although I'm going to turn it off pretty quick here. Welcome. Thank you so much for calling in. I'm going to ask you a polling question shortly about how many of you, if you have attended more than one of these webinars, or if this is your first one. But if this is your first one, we're so glad you could make it. We've had a series this spring. This is our culminating event. The fifth one is in conjunction with the Child Welfare League of America that we're so excited is here and going to be engaging in this dialogue with us for the next hour. I just see that North Dakota is also here in the webinar room, so that's cool. We have got a lot of states this time. A lot of different parts of the United States are here. So the webinar is called Connecting the Dots, Critical Thinking, Coaching, and Supervision. Today we have myself and then Julie Collins and Michael Schultz. There you can see our smiling faces here. I am an academic coordinator with the UC Davis, the Northern California Training Academy, which is housed with the Center for Human Services, and we provide training all across the state of California for human services. I have typically focused on child welfare in 28 Northern California counties. And I have been here, let's see, I'll give you a little bit of information about me. I've been here for 13 years, which is longest I've ever worked for any place. So I'm feeling quite homey in my little office. I have spent probably the last 10 years pretty darn focused on coaching and have spent a lot of time talking about coaching in lots of different venues and lots of different counties, and have worked in several different states and have been just honored and privileged to do this work. And then we also have two others on the call with us. Julie and Michael, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Julie Collins, and as you see, I'm the Vice President for Practice Excellence at CWLA. I have a long history in child welfare, a lot of that in Canada, and also have a background in behavioral health and managed care. And I've been at CWLA since 2001, and I hold a variety of portfolios as part of my work. I oversee the CWLA Standards of Excellence. I also do a lot of work on the mental health, behavioral health side, as well as prevention of child abuse and neglect. And, you know, like Nancy, do a lot of training and technical assistance with both public and private agencies on a variety of topic areas. So it's my honor to be part of this webinar and spend a little bit of time with you, sharing some of the work that we do.
We're honored to have you, Julie. I am so excited about this partnership. Michael?
Yes, good day, everyone. And I want to say thank you to both Julie and Nancy. It really is a privilege to work with both of you. I am a licensed psychologist and family therapist with special training in family systems medicine. I'm the Director of Organizational Climate and Staff Wellness in Connecticut, which is really about organizational leadership and focusing on workforce development related to secondary trauma and primary stress. I also do a lot of work with CWLA, and we're collaborating on a book about crisis assessment and intervention with groups that have experienced trauma and crisis. So we're trying to integrate a little bit of that into today's conversation. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, from my colleagues.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael and Julie. I'm going to welcome those of you who have joined us new to the webinar. Quick few things. Number one is you are muted because we've got 125 people and at least 34 states are represented on this call, which is pretty fantastic.
Awesome.
I don't think we have anybody from Hawaii or Alaska, so I think we should call our friends there, see if they want to join in, see if we can get up to as close to 50 as possible. You can use your chat window to talk to everybody, or just to send a private chat. If you are wanting to send a chat message to everybody, then when you click on the chat feature, you can see that you can send it to all panelists and attendees. So you can make sure that you're sending it to the right people. And I see Alaska is on, so awesome. That's excellent. That might be 35 that we've got. We are going to shortly go over some more ways to communicate on this webinar. But first, I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about the history of coaching for the Northern California Training Academy and what we do. So I'm just briefly, like I said, we serve 28 counties. We focus on a variety of topics in child welfare, but our most innovative and focused ones are safety organized practice, continuous quality improvement, trauma-informed services, and coaching. You can see here is a list of our coaching specific offerings if you're interested. We have a coaching institute for child welfare supervisors and program managers and directors. And then we also have coaching-based case management clients for both clients and traditional aged youth. We separate those so that there's clients really either resource parents or biologic parents. We have coaching the reluctant worker, classes on critical thinking, and we are very excited to say we have dates for our third National Conference on Coaching and Human Services, which will be on May 5th and 6th in 2020. So mark your calendars, next May 5th and 6th, 2020. We'd love to see you out here in Davis. And then we also have a coaching toolkit for child welfare practitioners that we published in 2012. We're updating that currently. You can download it on our website, and you can also purchase it through the UC Davis bookstore. I'd love to find out how many of you have attended a webinar before. So I'm going to open up a polling question, and you'll probably see it on your screen, and let us know if you've attended, how many of these webinars you've attended. And I see we're up to 140 people. For fun, we are asking everybody to chat in what state they're from so we can see how many states we've got on the call. So if you haven't already done so, take a minute. Oh, good. We've got Colorado. That's great. Hi, Krista. Good. Glad you're here. Delaware. All right. I think we're getting a few more states. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. It looks like a lot of you have 71%. This might be the first one that you've attended. A couple of you have attended all of them, but this looks like it might be the first for many of you. So welcome. We're glad you're here. Okay. I would also love for those of you who have taken one of these. Well, you know what? Yeah, let's do that. In the question and answer section of your Zoom toolbar, you should be able to see a box that says Q&A. You can open that, and then you'll see where you can type in a question. And I'm asking you actually not to type in a question, but a comment of what are some of the key insights you've taken away from either one of the coaching webinars that you've been on in the past, and since well, yeah, let's just do that. If you've been on one of the webinars in the past, in one of the past 4 webinars, type in what some of the insights that you've had have been from attending. Sorry, that came out super jarbled. That's why I took off my video camera. I couldn't handle the pressure. Excellent. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to keep pulling through some of the slides. Julie, I'm actually going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about CWLA.
Hi, Hi, everybody. So for those of you that don't know of CWLA, we're one of the oldest national organizations that has members that are both public and private agencies. We're actually going to be 100 in 2000 and next year. And our organization really, if you want to go to the next slide, really focuses on bringing together the public and private agencies, creating those kinds of partnerships to advance the policies or the best practices, really trying to work towards the better outcomes for children and families that are vulnerable. And we do a lot of advocacy work that we often involve our members, both public and private, as part of, and have led to a lot of successful things. I mentioned about the standards of excellence already, and the other thing that perhaps for those of you that aren't aware, we also do a lot of training and have training for foster parents, our PRIDE model of training. We do for kinship providers, but also have a supervision training as well that is getting updated to add some of the things that we'll be talking about today. So thank you. Nancy, back to you.
Okay, so we're going to do another quick polling question, which is to find out what your job title is. So we want to learn a little bit more about who's on the call. And it seems like the brain-based coaching webinar we had was a big hit. So lots of insights from the brain. We love talking about the brain. Okay, we've got almost 110 people have responded. So there's 30 of you that are on your emails, which is totally understandable. So I'm going to end the polling question in just a few. Oh, that got attention of some. Going to end the polling here in 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. You can see we've got a majority of leaders, lots of supervisors, other leadership, 30% social workers, practitioners, policy planners, couple of probation officers. Awesome. I love working with probation officers, and a fair number of education university partners. Excellent. We've got one more polling question for you, which is, let's see, we've already kind of done this, so I'm going to ask, where do you work? We'd love to know what sector you're from. Looks like child welfare is definitely showing up today. Not a surprise.
So Nancy, maybe the people that are putting other could put in the chat what other means for them.
Great.
Where they.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Healthcare, yeah, that's good. TANF. Wow, an interesting mix of people. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're so excited you're here. Behavioral health, nobody from APS. We'll have to work on that.
Tribal government. Oh, a lot of.
Excellent. Thank you for participating in our polling questions. So for today, we are going to talk a little bit about connecting the dots and what these dots means from both the perspective of UC Davis and CWLA, which we're always happy as we align. Well, our dots look very similar. We would love for you to use your question and answer and just write what is an expectation that you have for today. What is something that why did you choose to sign up today, and what are you hoping to get out of this next 45 minutes of connecting the dots? And you can either use your chat feature or you can use the Q&A box. Critical thinking, coaching, practical application, enhanced supervision skills. Fabulous. So the good news is that I think everybody is in the right place. Here is how to tie in critical thinking with coaching. Excellent. Fabulous. So you can keep typing those if you haven't yet. And we'll keep cruising through our presentation, and hopefully we'll meet lots of these. We'll hit lots of these topics. This is on your screen. You'll see 5 light bulbs. I attended a online training from the Neuro Leadership Institute, and they used this really cool way to take notes, basically, that will that lead to insights and lead to critical thinking and lead to actually helping to remember what it is that you're learning from any kind of learning event. So I offer this as something that you can use for your in your classes and how you work with others. You can use it as a supervisor, as a coach. But what you do is you track your insights as you're learning. So if you hear something that somebody says today that you think, oh yeah, that was really interesting, I'd like to remember that. Maybe that's a 1, and you write it at the bottom of the piece of paper. If one of us say something that you go, wow, that was really, I just had a big aha moment, I really want to remember this, then you would scale it as a 5. So it's a way to scale your thinking, which is a way to think about your thinking. And since the topic for today is connecting the dots, I thought it might be handy to use something like this to help you think about how you learn and how you take notes and remember in the future.
A lot of webinar.
Okay, so from the perspective of UC Davis, as many of you know, we have a UC Davis skills-based coaching model. Our model is adapted from Rush and Sheldon and Gallagher, and a lot from the field of education. Many of you have seen this before. If not, it's in our coaching toolkit, and we can get you a copy of that if you haven't yet seen it. But we use this skills-based model for coaches and for, most importantly, for supervisors. So you as a supervisor, if you are a supervisor, can use a skills-based model, can use coaching as a way to approach supervision, so coaching-based supervision, coaching-based case management, and it's basically the approach. It's how you approach the work that you do. And we believe, deeply believe that coaching is how you build critical thinking. So critical thinking takes practice. It takes building the muscle of your brain. And the way to do that is by answering questions. You can either answer questions that you pose yourself in the form of reflection, or you can answer questions that other people pose in the form of coaching. But the questions are what make you think. And the more people think, the better they become at critical thinking. So here we've got Socrates. I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. And yet we work in a field that is pretty fear-based, and we can have a hard time in reality of what that looks like. And if this looks like you or people that you know that you work with, where I expect you all to be independent, innovative, critical thinkers who will do exactly as I say, is oftentimes what is in the room is I will trust you to be a critical thinker, but that means it's the same as what the supervisor or leadership will think or say. And then it's oftentimes just more, effective to have the supervisor or the leadership do all of the thinking. And that is counterintuitive and counterproductive to building the critical thinking of social workers. Michael or Julie, I'm going to hit pause. Do you have anything to add to that, or does that spark anything for either of you?
Julie, you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I just think that it is consistent with some of the work that we would have done, but it's spot on, Nancy, in terms of what we know.
Okay, great.
Nice. Yeah, I would briefly say very much the same thing. And to our colleagues in child welfare, you know, in particular, and I know we have a high percentage of folks on the call. I believe our workers need to believe that they have our confidence, that when they go out into the field, they're going to have to make split decisions that are not easy to make. And we have to create a climate where it's okay for them to not only make those spontaneous decisions, but also to be able to process and reflect on them later as a learning opportunity. And that's a really hard thing to do, really hard thing to balance.
It is so hard to balance. It's so easy to talk about and so hard to put into practice.
Right.
Is what we have found over and over again. Yeah. Which is the same as could be said true for social work practice. The parallel thinking is really quite profound. Here is our definition of critical thinking. We use one from the Foundation for Critical Thinking that was started by Richard Paul. And he wrote that critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to make your thinking better. And we really do believe that coaching is how you help somebody do that. We hear time and again where supervisors, leaders, lead workers really with the best intention want to be really helpful, and new social workers obviously need a lot of help. And so when they're struggling or when they're not sure what to do, boy, there is somebody armed with an answer of how do you deal with this kind of family, or how do you deal with this kind of situation. And the reality is that the more that we give workers the answers, which is really just our answers, the harder it is for workers to feel, number one, confident enough to come up with their own answers, but just being able to really think through those can be difficult. And we are often promoted to a position of supervisor or leader because we've made good decisions. So we are promoted because we're good decision makers and we've made good decisions and we have good critical thinking skills. And it is so incredibly difficult to not make decisions and think for other people, and to let them really spend time and thinking through for themselves. This is just a well-cultivated thinker. And how do we get social workers to really become a well-cultivated thinker? And when we think about that, it's things like social workers or probation officers or practitioners in all of human services to be able to raise vital questions, to formulate clearly and precisely, behaviorally based, specific terms, what the situation is, what the worries are, that they can gather and assess relevant information. They can use abstract ideas to interpret. They test what their beliefs are against relevant criteria. All of these things that a well-cultivated thinker does is something that we believe a coaching-based supervisor or a director would really keep in mind. And yet we know that there are a lot that gets in the way of critical thinking. And if you attended the webinar on neuroscience in coaching-based I can't remember what we called it, neuroscience and coaching, we talked a lot about what gets in the way of critical thinking. And what gets in the way of critical thinking is the brain. So we've got the prefrontal cortex where we do all of our good thinking, and we also have parts of our brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, that are working really hard to keep us safe and protect us. And when they see a threat or they feel threatened, they need energy. Those amygdala and the hippocampus will just absolutely take the resources of the prefrontal cortex and use them to protect. And that will be from a social threat or it will be from a physical threat. But they will take the resources of critical thinking. And oftentimes it is just simply sort of as easy as what that is, that when we go into a stress response, it is very, very difficult to think critically. And we talk a lot in our coaching work about how to help people come to work, come to a learning event, come to any kind of situation in a professional field where their threat response is as low as possible. And what do the supervisors and the leaders, coaches have to do? What impact can they have on that learning environment? In the name of time, I'm going to go over this really pretty quickly. I'd like to turn this over to Julie and Michael. But we've got what we call the ladder of inference that we didn't call it that. Judith Glasser, and she wrote a book called Conversational Intelligence that is absolutely awesome. And she talked a lot about how we get to actions, how we move through our day, and how we move through our day is this ladder of inference. Where there's an event, we have our bioreactions to that, our body responds. Before we have feelings, our body is responding. From our bioreactions, we have our feelings. From there, we have our thoughts. Beliefs come after our thoughts. And from our beliefs, then we start to take action and we see results. As you can see, the feelings, thoughts, and beliefs, well, that's where assumptions, interpretations, and meaning lie, and that's what we call the land of making stuff up. And how can we, as supervisors and coaches, really help that piece really take the back seat? How can we really help instill or call forth the prefrontal cortex for critical thinking before people move to actions? And you guys, some of you have seen this slide before, but if you're coaching, you're asking a lot of questions and you're looking for solutions. And how many times do we all find ourselves in giving people advice, telling them what to do, and focused on problems? That is in the opposite quadrant, right? That is not coaching. That's telling and advice giving. There is a time and a place for it, but it's not coaching, right? So that is one of the things that supervisors and leaders have to do, is figure out how and when do they coach and how and when do they tell and give advice, because there is the place for both. So with that, I am going to skip over the insight real quick. I'm going to show you again our coaching model. You can see that we build in a lot of time for analysis and self-reflection, facilitated reflection into our coaching model. And that is precisely for building critical thinking. So Julie and Michael, I'm going to pass that over to you as fast as I can.
All right.
What we were hoping before we get going to ask a few questions of you. So Nancy, will you launch the poll?
Yep. There you go. Check all that apply. Do you? Oh, sorry, you haven't gotten it yet. There you go. Okay, check all that apply. Do you work in an interdisciplinary environment, work with high-risk populations? And this is multiple choice. This is not one or the other.
All might apply.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, I'm going to end the polling. It looks like most people have answered.
Great.
Everybody can see the results.
Yeah,
Nice.
so a lot deal with people with trauma and crisis. Yeah. And I think, Nancy, there's another question, a few more.
Yes. Okay. So hold on. Let me make sure. Question number 5. Check all that apply. Do you or staff in your organization experience? Is this a trick question, Julie?
Yeah. Yeah. We are speaking with the converted.
Okay, a few more folks want to take a few. Okay, we're still getting a few responses. All right, I'm going to end polling and share the results.
All right.
All right, so organizational stress, a lot of that. Yeah. So, all right, thanks for that, Nancy, and thanks for everybody answering. We'll be using some of that as we talk. But I wanted to spend just a few minutes with you talking about CWLA's approach to connecting the dots that really emerges from our work of going to states and private agencies, but reviewing cases as well as looking at the ways that the organizations are working. And that one of the key things that we find is that the connecting the dots just isn't really happening. And that kind of critical thinking piece isn't there, even though the information might be there, but those pieces aren't. And even when we find that even when people might have the skills, it's still not happening. So there might be multiple times that we go and review X number of years apart, and yet it's still seeing the same kind of thing. And what we observe in that is that there really is a lot of, you can go ahead, that's okay, that there's a lot of staff that are stressed and experiencing symptoms of what would appear to be secondary traumatic stress, if not some, all, and the aspect of the burnout. And so we really recognize that while you can do, Nancy, to the next one, there's pieces that can be done related to the practice and making sure that they're making the connections in the assessment and following those pieces. But what we thought, Nancy's talked about some of that, and we thought you've been getting so much related to the coaching piece, we thought it might be helpful to bring a little bit of the lens related to this other piece that we observe and know from the research, that unless these pieces are being addressed, having an environment and the space for the safety, that then there's no room for the critical thinking. And Nancy, referenced a little bit some of that. But I brought Michael to this webinar because he really was involved with CWLA and a lot of work that we did in Connecticut that really focused on that connecting of the dots. And even though we did all that work and did all that training, one of the pieces that was missing was really that organizational piece and the creating of that space for the psychological safety component of it. So and he'll be talking more about that because he will be able to draw on a lot of the good work that they've been doing there. But to pause for a minute, I want to go back to that stress response, Nancy, that you had up earlier. If you go to the version I have, really what we're seeing is it's a similar kind of response in terms of the trauma, where if that survival part of the brain stays on, the other parts, right, the thinking part of the brain and the regulation of emotions isn't really happening. And I actually add a freeze component of it, that it's not just fight, flight, or freeze, fight and flight, it's also freeze. And I add that because I think we see that a lot more in child welfare than people realize, both with the clients that we deal with, as well as even in the staff. I mean, you think about staff that you've had that you've struggled with, they have all those cases just filed in the drawer, and they don't seem to ever be able to get anything done. They don't seem to ever be able to move, etc. I mean, I think that, that's some of what potentially is really happening here in terms of some of potentially an aspect for them, that their survival part of the brain is still on and they're really in their freeze mode. And what we also know from the research in terms of the trauma piece, especially when we look at the trauma-informed evidence-based practices, one of the key things that they have there is really addressing that psychological safety. And it really is that piece of making sure that a person can take care of themselves and be safe. And the pieces that often we see, which you probably already know, so I'm not necessarily teaching you anything new, but that sense of lack of control and the powerlessness and having no choice are really important for us to really be paying attention to. And what we find is unless this piece is dealt with, unless people feel psychologically safe, that there's not a whole lot of critical thinking that's going to even happen. And this is relevant for the families we deal with, but it's also relevant as supervisors for you all in terms of the work that you're doing. Nancy, to the next one. There are a few practice-related kinds of things I'm going to highlight really quickly, and then Michael will be talking more in terms of the supervisory pieces that you could be doing, although the pieces I'm going to say are relevant for a supervisor. But it's really creating space for choices, and that some of those choices, so some of that gets to some of the coaching aspects, but could be beyond that, of really giving them the choices that help them feel a little bit more of that sense of control over what's happening, that helps with bringing that stress response or that survival part of the brain down. And another part of it, Nance, to the next one, would be in terms of empowerment. And I think that the cultural humility approach, I don't know if any of you are using it, but it's so synergistic with this, because part of the way that you can use the cultural humility approach is really to say to the person, I'm not an expert, you're really the expert, teach me, help me to understand who you are, what you're all about, what your strengths are, what you need. And in that doing, that is empowering them. And in the empowering them, it really is helping them have choice in terms of what they share, have a sense of control, and helps with really bringing that survival part of the brain down. So I just can't emphasize enough some of these pieces as being so critical in those connecting dots to create the space for the critical thinking. And so Michael really has more of the depth of the information that we really wanted to share with you. But before we get to that, we did have a few questions for you. So Nancy?
Sorry, so we are going to, right here, launch polling.
I want to know a little bit more in terms of the kind of supervision or supervisors, if you're supervising, excuse me, sorry, the kind of supervision you're doing, what you have available to you. I know there's a few people that are on the webinar listening who are some of those consultants, you know, like Michael. Are they available to you as part of the work that you're doing? And if you look at, you know, your responses, it really is interesting because there's not a whole lot in terms of the wellness or some of that support and extra things that you need as supervisors. Nancy, I think there's one other question that we have for folks, if you don't mind.
Let's see, which one would you like me to show up?
Oh, okay, never mind. That's okay. Michael, do you want to take it from here? How about talking about some of that stuff related to the safety and the trust and creating that context?
Sure, thank you. And thanks to both of you for really setting a nice foundation. You know, I have to say, after listening to the two of you, it shifted a little bit of my thinking. And I want to start by saying the polling is extremely helpful. because I feel like I'm on the phone with lots and lots of colleagues who really live and understand the challenges day in and day out. This work changes people. It changes us personally, it changes us professionally. And we and the staff that we work with are dealing with a couple of really strong paradoxes. And one paradox is that by and large, the people who need the help the most are often the folks who seek it the least, which means that our staff are, knocking on doors, entering into the worlds of families and communities where they're not always welcome. And that in and of itself can really impact how people see themselves, how they see the world, and how they see other people seeing them. And so that's one of our paradoxes. The other, which I think complicates that for supervisors, is that very often folks with the least training and the least experience have the most direct contact with the most difficult clients at the worst possible times. And so as a supervisor, you're doing a lot of damage control. You're doing a lot of crisis intervention, not only intervening with the families, but also with the staff themselves. So this piece about cultivating a reflective context of safety and trust means, on one level, we must find spaces to be able to pause and to validate and to listen. And we know that that's a lot easier said than done. Our schedules are such, our demands and work and caseloads are such that it's really, really hard to be proactive. And that last polling around wellness and around access to consultants, I think really bears that out. That it's almost like 1 out of 2 of us have access to things like that, which are direct ways to deal with things like burnout and organizational stress and secondary trauma. And, unfortunately, many folks will feel that they don't have the time for those activities, when in fact those are the very things that we need in our toolbox to be able to stay focused and remain therapeutic and professional under extraordinarily stressful circumstances. So cultivating the safety, the reflective context of safety and trust, I think is about us as leaders initially, and finding those places where we can have parallel conversations. I think it brings us to coming more as a facilitator than one who is directive. And I think already both of my colleagues have talked about the ways in which we need to formulate questions and give our folks time and access to really reflect on where they are at any moment and what their decision making is like. So I'm going to give you a quick quote from Bruce Springsteen, one of my favorites. And the boss talks about trust as being a very fragile thing. And trust involves allowing others to see as much of ourselves as we have the courage to reveal. And, trust is a two-way street. It's a relational process. And I think as supervisors, we have to figure out with each person that we work with where that zone is of relatedness that can help humanize the kinds of things that we're all dealing with. If you wouldn't mind, could you go to the next slide? So this next piece is really about the person of the professional and the whole idea of integrating who we are as people with what it is we're trying to do as professionals. And this is where I think some of what Julie talked about in terms of cultural humility comes in. I think we always have to be thinking about age and culture and development and gender and race and sexuality and spirituality. Our staff have and our colleagues have very rich lives and relationships. And a lot of the coaching piece is having a good understanding of who people are, where they come from, what their lenses might be, and so that we can promote this concurrent level of both autonomy that level of independence that comes with critical thinking, with the notion of belonging, of feeling that they have a place and a value in the organization. And I think this goes right up the supervisory chain. So, you know, for a moment, I'd like you to think for yourselves of who it is that's supervising you currently. And I don't know about you folks, but I've had probably 30 supervisors. Sometimes, you know, it changes, like it feels like I'm changing my socks and changing supervisors. And that that really matters. I think who our supervisor is at any given moment is really critical. That whole relational piece is really extraordinary. And our organizations are not always mindful or, I think, thoughtful about what those changes mean. And I think particularly if you're working in larger organizations where that change seems to be constant. So this slide is really about the unique qualities that people bring into the exchange with you, both their unique qualities, your unique qualities, and then the chemistry between you. Can we go to the next slide?
Okay, so here's the polling question. How would you describe your style of supervision or that of your supervisor?
Great.
And also, as you're filling that out, if you have questions, for Michael, you can go ahead and, or Julie or myself, you can put them in the Q&A box. Just type them in, and we'll answer them when we can. Okay, I'm going to end polling here in just a few seconds. Okay.
That's great. Okay, well, again, as I said earlier, we're speaking to the converted. I think folks really, you know, it's interesting that when you conduct a workshop like this, the people who come are already the people who are working in this way, which is really a good thing. And in many ways, you know, you wish that some of the folks who weren't on this were listening to this, because I think in many of our organizations, people are often more directive and less collaborative. And as you see here, we have people who are already working in a collaborative way, who are, of course, attracted to this kind of a webinar. So it kind of builds on itself. And I like that. This is a very helpful slide. Okay, I think if it's okay, yeah, we can just move to the next one. I know that I'm trying to be cognizant of the time. And I'm wondering, yeah, we can just take a minute with this one, Nancy, just again for the sake of time.
Okay.
Because I think my sense is that these slides really converge with one another.
Sure, and we just got a comment, Michael, from a participant that said, I wonder if our staff agree that we are collaborative, i.e.
Yeah, it's a great question.
And I did have that thought. I thought, you know, I think I'm pretty collaborative, but sometimes it's reflection is so hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to say to you and to that participant that one of the questions, you got a little ahead of me. I was going to ask you the question of if you could see yourself through the eyes of the people you supervise, you know, what would you see? And what would they say about you? And I think that that's really important. And it takes a lot of courage to be able to ask that. You know, people like Scott Miller and Barry Duncan and folks like that will include feedback in every encounter they have. So at some point during the conversation or a therapy session, they will ask the question of, so how is this going right now? You know, are we talking about the right stuff? Right. Does this make sense? You know, is there anything we've left out that maybe we need to make sure we talk about before we leave? You know, that kind of thing, to really strengthen the relationship.
Yeah, that's great.
So, okay, if it's okay, I think that's wonderful. That helps a tremendous amount. Can we go to the next slide?
Sure.
And how are we doing for time? Okay, so I'm going to try to be really quick here. You know, I want to say with the group piece that in my experience, that is the next dimension. that we really need to focus on. That in order to do this work, we have to be part of teams and we have to be part of groups where the value is no one goes it alone. Now that is a leadership issue. That starts right from the top of the organization down, in terms of how reticent people are and how willing people are to utilize groups, to start to think about circles rather than hierarchical up and down, to really think about, and I know on another slide we're going to talk a little more about intervision, the idea of that each participant in a group really has a very unique lens. And part of our work as supervisors is to be able to facilitate a group process of safety and trust, and where we're building that level of team, and that we're working more routinely in teams. And so we mentioned the reflecting teams here, and for some of you may know well what a reflecting team is. It comes out of family therapy, and it started by folks who were using a one-way mirror, people like Tom Anderson from Norway, Carl Tom from Canada, Bill Lass from New Hampshire, and there's a host of others. And essentially what the reflecting teams did was level the playing field, where a team from behind a mirror, after observing a process for 30 or 40 minutes, would come into the therapy space and then reflect to the therapist and the family, in a positive way, what they were seeing, what they were hearing, tell a very brief story. And the idea for the family or the therapist was they could take or leave essentially those ideas. It's kind of like a smorgasbord of ideas. What it did, though, was really create a much more collaborative environment, where people were more willing to share ideas and thoughts, and with the notion that they didn't have to be right, that it was really more about bringing together the qualities of the team. And in our supervisions, there are ways to structure things so that we can have dialogues about dialogues. Have a supervisor and a supervisee talk through a case, and then get the viewpoints from the team around them. And of course, you can rotate that so that everyone has an opportunity to be both a reflector and somebody who's working directly with a supervisor. The other piece, and maybe if you folks in your comments could share this a little bit, I'm a believer of live supervision as well. I think if you want to teach swimming, you really have to be in the water. And so having our staff see us conduct a family meeting or a community meeting, or something that's experiential, where as a coach you can then process that. And then likewise, I think once staff start to see our frailties and vulnerabilities and competencies, we can observe them and give immediate feedback in terms of what that's like. So I'm hoping and guessing that many of you are already thinking in this way, and I think the more you can create those spaces, the more we engender safety and trust. If you wouldn't mind, we'll go to the next one. And Nancy and Julie, if I'm going too fast, please slow me down.
No, except I just wrote a really funny comment on the chat box that I need to explain. So
yeah, go ahead.
A participant wrote to the panelists that said that such a profound thing, that supervisors are under such organizational stress and secondary trauma that their supervision style reflects the same kind of flight
there you go.
freeze response that their workers experience. And I wrote, all I can say is truth.
Yes, that's perfect.
What I mean, truth. It is.
Yeah.
That just, we are all, the field is just experiencing so much stress and trauma that it's hard to know which way to look.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, thank you to the person who brought, I have chills here thinking about that, because I believe that what we're talking about here, these kinds of changes, really happen from the ground up, not from the top down. I don't think you can direct this to happen. I think you can tap into the resources that already exist. And our frontline supervisors, particularly, who are in the epicenter of these really harrowing cases and then trying to help staff cope through them, need a lot of coaching themselves. They need to be part of, peer supervision groups or peer intervision groups. And the difference between supervision and intervision is that intervision is less hierarchical. It's much more collaborative. You're sitting in circles. You're not having someone who's doing a PowerPoint. I'm loving look at the body language on some of the people in the room there. It's kind of interesting that you have two people out in front. I'd rather see them in chairs, quite frankly, having a conversation, because there's so much expertise in those rooms. And I think a lot of our work is how can we bring that expertise out and allow people to use their voices. So the approach, if I could just sort of wind it down, is a facilitative one. And I think of it also at the level of systems consultation. And I think there's three dimensions to that are really important. And one is on a case level. And I really think that it's so critical to be able to walk through these cases with our staff and get a sense from them on how the clients are impacting the staff. And also for those supervisors, how things are impacting them in their own supervision. Secondly, is I think we can do a lot of really healthy agency and program systems consultation. And I think that that's where the people who come from the outside, TA, people like the Child Welfare League and others, it's very difficult often to be the person within your organization to drive those processes. And sometimes having another voice or another perspective, someone who can help bring out the voices is really critical. Stephen Breyer, one of our Supreme Court justices, has a sort of a guiding principle, and it's nobody speaks once until nobody speaks twice until everybody speaks once. And it's so critical that we find ways to bring in all those voices. And then the last piece is that the consultations need to take place on the larger systems level, where, say a child welfare system includes schools and courts and mental health agencies and protective service agencies. We need to find ways to forge alliances and to really bring those pieces together in very deliberate ways. Lastly, I want to say that there's 4 levels that we're starting to concentrate more on in Connecticut and some of the surrounding states. And that is, we're trying to work more on the cognitive level, which is your critical thinking. The other is the physiological level. We're trying to get our groups out there doing things. This is where the wellness piece comes in. We're utilizing our wilderness school to get people out hiking and canoeing and using ropes courses and those kinds of things. I think they are amazingly creative endeavors, and it brings together that mind, body, and spirit. A third realm is just, again, the emotional piece. I think you guys have that down really well. And the last one is on the relationship level. And, really working on healthy conflict resolution, really helping teams to work through problems together, and recognizing that in order to do that, we really have to have a climate where it's safe to bring up something that may be different. And what always worries me about hierarchical approaches is the idea of groupthink. And I believe that that's what affects critical thinking. You hear a lot about consistency, and I think sometimes consistency can get in the way of creativity. And I think there's a difference between structure and consistency. And I think all of our institutions have to wrestle with that. We want to make sure that the humanness of our work comes out and is part of that ground. So I'm looking at the time, and I think it's probably a good place for me to pause. Does that make sense to Nancy and Julie?
Yeah, so it's almost exactly 11 o'clock. So the webinar is an hour, and those of you who need to scoot off to other commitments, then a fond farewell, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to flash a screen that shows our website. All of our webinars have been recorded. This one is being recorded, and we will post that on our webinar, our website within the next couple of days. We will send you all a link so that you can review all of the webinars, and any other questions about the webinar series, just let us know. A huge thank you to Julie and Michael for partnering with us on this last grand finale of webinars. I so much appreciate your work and contributions, partnership. With that, I would love to open it if anybody has any questions to pose to Michael and Julie, or myself. Please, you can type in the Q&A section and we can get those answered. Or Michael, if you have any other thoughts, we can keep going here for a few more minutes. Well, here, let me
Sure.
This is where we do pull a lot of our reference material that we use with the Northern Training Academy. And then this is our website, and my email is on the bottom.
Nice. So I would just click on the Q&A, and that's where I would see the questions.
Yeah.
Michael, there is a question for you. Somebody's asking if you could reference any articles on supervision versus intervision for them to follow up on.
I can, and the place I would begin is to look in it's in the solution-focused supervision literature. I think that would be the first place to start. And there's a woman that had been at Southern Connecticut State University. I'm not sure she's still there. Her name's Charlene Adelfer. And also Evan Imber Black from the University of used to be with the University of Massachusetts, and Janine Roberts also was with the University of Massachusetts. The three of them may be in different places. They began that work like in 1980, 81, 82. Janine and Evan have written all kinds of things. They write about rituals and families and family therapy. They write about larger systems. If you just Google the two of them, there's just a wealth of things that come up. Charlene is more obscure in that realm. And I know that a lot of her dissertation had to do with intervision. I don't know the extent to which she published pieces of that, but I think with Janine and Evan Imber Black, that would be a really good place for people to start. And you'll see that both of them are still practicing from what I know. I think that Evan went to the Einstein College of Medicine a few years back, but both of them are still very active, and they're incredible thinkers, and they're also practitioners. So when you read their material, it is chock full of case examples. I hope that helps. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we're still here. There was one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, there was one more question that said, interested in how circles are constructed rather than traditional organizational structures.
Yeah, what a great question. I think first off, it's about leadership, and I think that there's nothing that can possibly replace leaders who recognize the strengths around them. And quite simply, a lot of what we do is, and I remember when I first came to the department, which was a very linear kind of a place, that just having people in a circle, setting chairs up, created a level of in some ways, I think a little bit of discomfort, but in other ways, just a very, very unique set of circumstances that it just changed the way people experience the room. So, brief therapists have this adage that it's not about insight and then action. It's about, one has to act their way to a feeling. And so rather than feeling their way to an action. And so I would say one way to start doing that is to actually, start setting up your spaces in circles. And there's also some work that's being done, I believe it's the state of Tennessee, around doing things like huddles, like football huddles, but only without all the gear, where, you bring a team together, they literally stand up. They stand up for 10 or 15 minutes. They might go around the room and talk about one thing that happened in the last week that they really like and appreciate. They could talk about, say, if the meeting was on a Monday, very briefly, what one thing can this team help you with this week, or what one thing are you worried about this week? There's some very simple things that I think can start to acculturate that. And you have to have champions in your administrative realm. That I believe that as supervisors, we have to think systems wherever we are. So find ways to align with people who do have authority, so that whatever your responsibilities are, they will be vetted. And we don't get a lot of chances at these things. And so every moment has to count. And of course, I once had a professor who told me, with every session, that we should act as if every meeting is our last. One, because that's the reality of the world, but the other is that if we're really focused, then we're going to have a more effective outcome, and not thinking so much about either where we've come from or where we're going. I don't know. I hope that helps the caller.
So, Michael, there's one other question that somebody had that I'm presuming would be relevant for you. So what do you think is the most important thing we can do when we're all feeling underwater?
Ah, nice. I really love that. That's a great question. First of all, we want to do our best to not be underwater. And I think the one thing is to listen to the feedback of people around you. I don't believe people start drowning without the knowledge of other folks. And sometimes other people will see it first. And we have to be approachable. We have to allow people to say things like, you look stressed, you look tired, et cetera. And so that's one piece, is keep it relational. That when we're underwater or drowning or in quicksand, we don't need to swim faster. We need to reach out, and we need to have someone that we can trust around us who can pull us out. I do believe that there's two pieces to this work, that if it's any two things that people hear, I'm hoping it's this. One is have a really healthy personal life, first and foremost. There's no other way to do this work effectively unless one has a healthy personal life. That's, how we eat, how we exercise, who we're hanging out with, get involved with art, music, drama, athletics, really live life on the outside to the fullest. Our agencies are not places for us to heal old wounds. And in fact, I think it just makes it worse. Secondly, in addition to having a good, healthy personal life and really being mindful of that, making sure you're eating lunch, you're getting out at reasonable times, that kind of thing, is to have a healthy network internally, to have colleagues that you like and that you can trust, and that will trust you and will get your back. Because as difficult as the things are that we're confronted with, if we have a healthy team around us, we can handle most things. It's when we don't have a healthy team around us, and stress, organizational stress, will often pit people against each other. And at the very moment we need to be aligned, we end up disconnecting from the very people who could help us to swim and to at least tread the water. The other thing I think for administrators, and I think particularly in child welfare, there's a mythology out there that if you work 60 hours a week and 65 hours a week and all that, that somehow you're a hero or a heroine. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. And people get rewarded for working weekends and working nights and having their cell phones on and things like that. That's something that I think is why people get thrown into the water. We cannot make that a value. I think if that is a value, then I think we're just going to see a sea of burned out people. And I do think there's a lot of ways that we can counter that. There's a lot of hope here. And I think what you folks have heard today, and I think with what Nancy and what Julie is bringing, I think is a tremendous breath of fresh air. And it connects us all. I think that we have to move from me to we in order to maintain our balance in the water.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome. I like that last comment. You're welcome. I see that. I do think it's about hope.
Yeah.
It's about hope. It's about collaboration, and it's about creativity. We got to bring those things together.
Well, thank you, Michael and Julie. I think that is just a fabulous way to close this webinar. So thank you to everybody who is still on, and the website is listed on your screen. That's where we'll post copies of the webinar, or we'll post a video of the webinar. And we hope to see you next year at our national conference, May 5th and 6th. Thank you, everybody.
Nancy, Julie, from CWLA, we'll just be adding the webinar to our members only section of the website, so you can be accessing it there as well. So thanks as well for joining. Bye, everybody.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thanks for the kind words.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Michael.